In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and winding roads, life unfolded at its own unhurried pace. The townsfolk were simple people who cherished their routines, finding joy in the little things: a warm cup of coffee on a cold morning, a friendly chat with a neighbor, or the laughter of children playing in the park. Every Friday evening, the heart of the town came alive at the community center, where locals gathered for what had become a beloved tradition: the weekly talent show. The talent shows weren't glamorous affairs by any means. There was no red carpet or fancy lighting, just a cozy room filled with folding chairs, a small stage adorned with fairy lights, and a microphone that sometimes crackled when turned on too loudly. But none of that mattered to the people who attended. What made these evenings special wasn't perfection. It was the shared sense of connection, the opportunity to celebrate each other's quirks and talents, and the chance to let loose after a long week. Among those who attended faithfully every Friday was Eleanor Hargrove, an elderly woman whose presence was as steady as the ticking clock on the wall. Eleanor wasn't one to draw attention to herself. She preferred sitting quietly in the back row, her hands folded neatly in her lap, observing everything around her with a soft smile. Her silver hair was always tied back into a tidy bun, and her clothes, though modest, were always clean and pressed. To most people, she seemed like just another face in the crowd, someone who blended seamlessly into the background. But Eleanor wasn't invisible. In fact, she was well liked by everyone who knew her. At the grocery store, shopkeepers greeted her warmly, often asking how her garden was doing. Children running past her on the sidewalk would stop to wave, and she'd respond with a kind nod and a gentle, "Hello, dear." Yet despite her warmth, there was something about Eleanor that kept others at arm's length. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, her words were measured and brief. Over time, the townsfolk began to think of her as a sort of enigma, a puzzle they couldn't quite solve but didn't feel entitled to pry into. On this particular Friday evening, the atmosphere at the community center buzzed with excitement. It was an open mic night, which meant anyone could sign up to perform without prior preparation. The lineup included a teenage boy strumming his guitar, a middle-aged couple attempting a comedic skit, and a group of kids planning to juggle oranges, though whether they'd succeed remained to be seen. As usual, Eleanor took her seat in the back, watching the chaos unfold with quiet amusement. As the evening progressed, the performances ranged from hilarious to heartfelt, earning applause and cheers from the audience. Between acts, a group of younger attendees huddled together near the refreshments table, giggling over cups of soda. They were in high spirits, their energy infectious. One of them, a bold teenager named Jake, suddenly pointed toward Eleanor and said with a grin, "Hey, why doesn't she go up there? I bet she has a story or two to tell." His friends laughed, thinking he was joking, but Jake, ever the mischief maker, decided to take it further. He stood up, raised his voice slightly, and called out, "Hey, Mrs. Hargrove, how about you come up here and sing us a song?" The room fell silent for a moment as all eyes turned to Eleanor. Some of the older folks frowned disapprovingly at Jake's antics, while others exchanged amused glances, assuming Eleanor would politely decline. After all, she hadn't participated in any of the talent shows before. Why would tonight be any different? To everyone's astonishment, Eleanor didn't brush off the suggestion. Instead, she hesitated for a moment, then slowly rose from her chair. Her movements were deliberate, almost regal, as though she were stepping onto a grand stage instead of a humble platform in a community center. The murmurs in the room grew louder, a mix of curiosity and disbelief rippling through the crowd. Jake looked momentarily stunned, unsure if he should apologize or laugh it off, but Eleanor simply walked toward the stage, her expression unreadable. When she reached the microphone, she adjusted it to her height and turned to face the audience. For a few seconds, she said nothing, merely gazing out at the sea of faces, staring back at her. Then, with a faint smile, she spoke softly but clearly. "Well, I suppose it's been a while since I've done something like this." Her words sent a ripple of anticipation through the room. A few people leaned forward in their seats, intrigued. Others exchanged puzzled looks, wondering what exactly they were about to witness. No one, not even Eleanor herself, could have predicted the impact her decision would have on everyone present that night. As Eleanor stood on the small stage, gripping the microphone with both hands, the room was filled with an uneasy mix of curiosity and skepticism. The initial shock of her agreeing to perform had worn off, leaving the audience unsure of what to expect next. Some people whispered behind their hands, speculating about whether she'd actually sing or make a lighthearted comment before stepping down. Others leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, clearly expecting this to be a brief and awkward moment that would soon fade into the background of the evening. Jake, the teenager who had playfully called her up, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't meant for Eleanor to take him seriously. His suggestion had been nothing more than a harmless jest, a way to keep the energy lively between acts. Now, watching her stand there with such calm composure, he felt a pang of guilt. What if she embarrassed herself? What if the crowd laughed, not out of amusement, but out of cruelty? Jake glanced at his friends, silently hoping they wouldn't say anything to make things worse. Meanwhile, the older members of the audience exchanged knowing looks. Many of them had known Eleanor for years, yet none could recall ever hearing her sing, or even speak much for that matter. She was the kind of person you noticed only because of her quiet reliability, the way she always showed up without demanding attention. To see her now, standing under the flickering fairy lights with all eyes on her, felt surreal. A few women in the front row smiled encouragingly, trying to ease whatever nerves she might be feeling, though they doubted she'd need it. Eleanor had always seemed unflappable, like someone who carried herself with quiet dignity no matter the situation. The silence stretched on longer than anyone anticipated. Eleanor didn't rush. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering her thoughts or summoning courage from some deep reservoir within herself. When she opened them again, her gaze swept over the room once more, lingering on familiar faces and strangers alike. There was no hint of hesitation in her expression. Instead, there was a quiet resolve, as though she'd made up her mind about something important. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I wasn't planning to do this tonight," she admitted, drawing a few chuckles from the audience. "But sometimes life surprises us, doesn't it?" Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound, causing several listeners to nod in agreement. It was true. Life did have a way of throwing unexpected moments your way, forcing you to step outside your comfort zone. With that, Eleanor took a deep breath, adjusted her grip on the microphone, and began. At first, her voice was barely audible, almost drowned out by the faint hum of conversation still lingering in the room. But as she continued, something remarkable happened. The notes she sang weren't tentative or shaky. They were strong, clear, and achingly beautiful. Her choice of song was an old classic, one that many in the audience recognized instantly. Yet it wasn't just the melody that captivated them. It was the emotion behind every word, the way her voice seemed to carry decades of untold stories. At first, the reaction was muted. People froze in their seats, unsure how to process what they were hearing. Was this really Eleanor Hargrove, the same woman who sat quietly in the corner week after week, blending into the background? The transformation was so sudden, so unexpected, that it left everyone momentarily speechless. Even those who had initially dismissed her performance as a joke found themselves leaning forward, their earlier skepticism melting away. Younger members of the audience, who might not have recognized the song right away, were struck by the sheer power of her voice. It wasn't flashy or over the top. Rather, it was hauntingly pure, like sunlight breaking through clouds on a gray day. Each note resonated deeply, filling the room with a warmth that felt almost tangible. For a moment, it was as though time itself had slowed down, allowing everyone to fully absorb the magic unfolding before them. Older attendees, however, experienced something entirely different. To them, Eleanor's voice wasn't just beautiful, it was nostalgic. It evoked memories of another era, a time when music was simpler but somehow richer, when songs told stories that lingered long after the final chord faded. They remembered Evenings spent gathered around radios listening to voices like hers, voices that spoke directly to the soul. Some of them exchanged glances, their eyes glistening with unshed tears, while others simply closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. Even Jake, who had started all of this as a light-hearted dare, sat frozen in awe. Gone was the mischievous grin he'd worn earlier. In its place was an expression of genuine wonder. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How had no one known about this side of Eleanor? Why had she kept such a gift hidden for so long? As the song progressed, the atmosphere in the room shifted completely. The initial skepticism gave way to reverence, the scattered whispers fading into complete silence. Every person in the audience was utterly transfixed, hanging on to each note as though afraid to miss a single moment. It was as if Eleanor had cast a spell over the entire room, weaving her voice into a tapestry of sound that touched hearts in ways words never could. By the time she reached the final verse, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. This was no ordinary performance. This was something extraordinary, a glimpse into a part of Eleanor that had remained hidden for far too long. And as the last note hung in the air, trembling slightly before dissolving into silence, the room remained perfectly still. For just a heartbeat, then another. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the world itself had paused to honor the beauty of what they had just witnessed. The silence that followed Eleanor's final note was profound, almost sacred. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from boredom or disinterest. It was heavy with emotion, as though the entire room was holding its collective breath. For a moment, no one dared to move. Even the faint hum of the overhead light seemed to dim in deference to what had just transpired. The audience sat frozen, their faces reflecting a kaleidoscope of emotions: awe, disbelief, gratitude, and for some, even tears. Eleanor stood motionless on the stage, her hands still resting lightly on the microphone stand. Her eyes were closed, now as if she were savoring the last echoes of the song before returning fully to the present. When she finally opened them, her gaze swept across the room once more. This time, however, it wasn't curiosity she saw staring back at her. It was reverence. Faces that had once regarded her with casual familiarity now looked at her with newfound admiration. She could feel the weight of their attention, but instead of shrinking under it, she seemed to grow taller, more radiant. Then, like the first crack of thunder after a still summer sky, the applause began. It started softly at first, a few hesitant claps here and there, but within seconds it swelled into a tidal wave of sound. People rose to their feet instinctively, their chairs scraping against the floor as they stood. The community center, which had felt so cozy and intimate moments earlier, now vibrated with energy. Hands clapped furiously, feet stomped, and voices cheered, creating a symphony of celebration that filled every corner of the room. "Bravo!" someone shouted, their voice breaking through the din. Others joined in, shouting words of praise and encouragement. Amazing. Incredible. That was beautiful. The compliments came fast and furious, tumbling over one another in their eagerness to reach Eleanor's ears. Yet despite the cacophony, there was no mistaking the sincerity behind each cheer. These weren't polite platitudes. They were heartfelt expressions of wonder and appreciation. Eleanor's cheeks flushed pink, and for the first time that evening, she looked genuinely surprised. She hadn't expected this reaction, not by a long shot. Singing had always been a private joy for her, something she did when no one else was around. To have it met with such overwhelming enthusiasm was both humbling and exhilarating. Slowly, she raised a hand to acknowledge the applause, her movements modest but graceful. The gesture only fueled the crowd's excitement further, prompting another round of cheers. As the initial burst of applause began to settle, people started approaching the stage, eager to express their admiration in person. A young girl, no, older than 10, was the first to step forward. Clutching a stuffed animal tightly to her chest, she looked up at Eleanor with wide, shining eyes. "That was the prettiest thing I've ever heard," she said shyly, her voice barely audible over the lingering chatter. Eleanor knelt down slightly to meet the girl's gaze, her smile soft and genuine. "Thank you, sweetheart," she replied, her tone warm and melodic like the fading notes of her song. "That means so much coming from you." Next came a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Tom. He explained that he used to play piano in his youth and hadn't touched an instrument in years, but hearing Eleanor sing had rekindled something inside him. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, her expression thoughtful. "Music has a way of doing that," she said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. One by one, others joined the line forming near the stage. Some brought flowers they'd picked from their gardens. Others offered hugs or simply stood silently, tears streaming down their faces. Each interaction carried its own unique significance, yet all shared a common thread: gratitude. People weren't just thanking Eleanor for her performance. They were thanking her for reminding them of the power of vulnerability, of stepping outside your comfort zone and sharing a piece of yourself with the world. Amidst the commotion, Jake, the teenager whose playful dare had sparked this unforgettable moment, found himself lingering near the back of the room. He watched as Eleanor graciously accepted praise from strangers and friends alike, her demeanor unchanged despite the whirlwind surrounding her. Guilt gnawed at him, not because he regretted encouraging her to sing, but because he realized how close he'd come to missing out on something extraordinary. If he hadn't teased her that night, would she have ever stepped onto the stage? Would anyone have discovered the treasure she'd kept hidden for so long? Summoning his courage, Jake made his way to the front of the room. When it was finally his turn to speak, he hesitated, unsure where to begin. "Mrs. Hargrove," he started, his voice cracking slightly. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression patient and kind. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you earlier," he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot, I didn't know you could sing like that. You're incredible." To his relief, Eleanor chuckled softly, the sound warm and inviting. "Don't apologize, Jake," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You gave me a gift tonight, one I didn't realize I needed until now." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound, leaving Jake speechless. He nodded dumbly, unable to find the right response, but the look of gratitude in his eyes said everything that needed to be said. As the evening wore on, the buzz of excitement showed no signs of fading. Conversations erupted throughout the room, each one centered around Eleanor's performance. People marveled at how effortlessly she had commanded the stage, how her voice seemed to transcend age and experience. Some speculated about whether she had professional training in her younger years. Others wondered aloud why she had chosen to keep such a talent to herself for so long. Yet despite their curiosity, no one pressed her for answers. They understood, perhaps instinctively, that some stories were meant to unfold in their own time. For Eleanor, the night marked a turning point. She had walked into the community center as a quiet observer, content to remain in the shadows. But she left as something else entirely. A beacon of inspiration, proof that greatness can emerge from the unlikeliest places. And though she couldn't have known it then, her decision to sing that evening would ripple far beyond the walls of the little hall, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. The days that followed Eleanor's unforgettable performance at the community center were unlike anything she, or anyone else in the town, had ever experienced. News of her breathtaking voice spread like wildfire, moving beyond whispered conversations and into the fabric of daily life. People who hadn't been present that night clamored to hear every detail, while those who had witnessed it firsthand found themselves reliving the moment over and again, their descriptions growing more vivid with each retelling. At first, Eleanor tried to carry on as usual. She watered her garden, tended to her cat, and visited the local grocery store just as she always did. But it quickly became clear that things had changed. Neighbors who had once exchanged polite pleasantries now greeted her with wide smiles and heartfelt compliments. "You've got a gift from heaven," one woman told her earnestly during a chance encounter at the bakery. Another man stopped her on the sidewalk to say, I haven't stopped thinking about your voice since Friday. It gave me goosebumps. Each interaction left Eleanor feeling both touched and slightly overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the sheer volume of praise took some getting accustomed to. But it wasn't just individuals reaching out to her. The entire town seemed eager to celebrate what they now saw as a shared victory. The community center's bulletin board, usually reserved for announcements about bake sales and book clubs, was suddenly covered in notes thanking Eleanor for her courage and talent. Someone even hung up a hand-drawn poster featuring a microphone, surrounded by musical notes with the words, "Eleanor Hargrove, our hidden star," written in bold letters across the top. When Eleanor saw it for the first time, she couldn't help but laugh softly to herself. Hidden star? She certainly didn't feel like one. But the sentiment warmed her heart all the same. Meanwhile, curiosity about Eleanor's past began to grow. People wanted to know more about the woman behind the voice, the stories she carried, the experiences that had shaped her. At first, they approached the subject delicately, afraid of prying or offending her. But Eleanor surprised everyone by opening up little by little, sharing snippets of her history when prompted. It started with small details, a mention of how her mother used to sing lullabies to her as a child, or how she joined the church choir as a teenager because it felt like home. These tidbits only fueled the town's fascination, leading to deeper questions and eventually revelations that stunned them all. One afternoon, a group of women invited Eleanor to join them for tea at the local cafe. They sat around a cozy table near the window, sipping chamomile and nibbling on buttery scones. The conversation flowed easily until one of the women, emboldened by the relaxed atmosphere, asked gently, "Eleanor, where did you learn to sing like that? You sound like someone who's performed on big stages before." Eleanor paused, her teacup halfway to her lips. For a moment, she considered brushing off the question with a vague response, as she might have done in the past. But something about the genuine interest in their eyes made her reconsider. Setting her cup down, she smiled faintly and said, "Well, I suppose it's time you knew. Yes, there was a time when I sang professionally, a long time ago." The table fell silent, save for the soft clink of teaspoons against porcelain. Encouraged by their rapt attention, Eleanor continued. She spoke of her early 20s, when she had moved to New York City with dreams of making it big in the jazz scene. Back then, she had been young and fearless, performing in smoky clubs and collaborating with musicians whose names still echoed through music history. Her voice had earned her standing ovations and glowing reviews, and for a while it seemed like nothing could stop her rise to stardom. But then, Eleanor said, her tone shifting to something softer, more reflective. Life happened. She explained how personal struggles, a broken relationship, financial difficulties, and the overwhelming pressure of fame had led her to step away from the spotlight. She returned to her hometown, seeking solace in simplicity, and slowly built a quiet life far removed from the glitz and glamour of the stage. Over time, singing became a private joy rather than a public pursuit, something she reserved for moments alone or the occasional church gathering. By the time she finished speaking, tears glistened in the eyes of several women at the table. One of them reached across and took Eleanor's hand, squeezing it gently. "We're so glad you came back to us," she said simply, her voice trembling with emotion. And though Eleanor didn't say it aloud, she felt the same way. Sharing. Her story had been cathartic, like unlocking a door she'd kept closed for decades. In doing so, she realized she wasn't just reconnecting with her audience. She was reconnecting with herself. Word of Eleanor's past soon spread throughout the town, adding another layer of awe to the respect people already felt for her. Some marveled at the idea of their unassuming neighbor having once rubbed shoulders with legends. Others admired the strength it must have taken to walk away from such a demanding career. Yet what struck everyone most deeply was the humility with which Eleanor carried herself. Despite her extraordinary talent and accomplishments, she remained the same kind, gentle woman they had always known. Inspired by her bravery, many residents began reflecting on their own lives. Conversations turned inward, with people wondering what hidden talents or passions they might be neglecting. A retired teacher decided to dust off her old paintbrushes, while a mechanic started tinkering with woodworking as a hobby. Even Jake, the teenager who had jokingly dared Eleanor to sing, picked up his guitar again after years of letting it gather dust. If Mrs. Hargrove can do it, he reasoned, why can't I? For Eleanor, the renewed interest in her music sparked an unexpected desire to share it with others. Encouraged by the outpouring of support, she agreed to perform at a few more local events. Each one met with thunderous applause and heartfelt gratitude. But it wasn't just performing that brought her joy. She also began teaching voice lessons to children in the community, passing on the techniques and wisdom she'd accumulated over a lifetime. Watching her students blossom under her guidance filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As weeks turned into months, Eleanor's presence in the town transformed from that of a quiet observer to a cherished mentor and icon. People sought her advice not just on singing but on life itself, valuing the perspective she offered as someone who had seen both triumph and hardship. Through it all, Eleanor remained humble, insisting that she was simply doing what made her happy. Yet everyone knew the truth. Her decision to sing that fateful Friday night had ignited something special, not just within herself but within the entire community. In the end, it wasn't just Eleanor's voice that had brought people to their feet. It was her courage, her authenticity, and her willingness to embrace vulnerability despite years of living quietly in the shadows. What had started as a playful dare had blossomed into a reminder of the power of taking chances, and of the incredible beauty that can emerge when we dare to let our true selves shine. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor's newfound role in the community continued to evolve in ways no one could have predicted, not even Eleanor herself. What had begun as a single moment of courage on a small stage grew into something much larger, a ripple effect that touched nearly every corner of the town. People who had once seen her as a quiet, unassuming figure now looked to her as a source of inspiration, not just for her voice but for the way she carried herself, with grace, humility, and an unwavering belief in the importance of sharing one's gifts with others. One of the most surprising developments was the surge of interest in music among the younger generation. Before Eleanor's performance, many kids in the town had dismissed singing or playing instruments as hobbies, meant only for talented people, those destined for stardom or fame. But watching Eleanor take the stage and pour her heart into a song showed them that music wasn't about perfection or accolades. It was about connection, expression, and joy. Slowly but surely, children began signing up for Eleanor's voice lessons. Eager to learn from someone whose passion for music felt so genuine and accessible, Eleanor approached her teaching role with the same warmth and patience that defined her personality. She didn't focus on technical perfection or rigid rules. Instead, she encouraged her students to find their own voices, to let their emotions guide their singing. Music isn't about being perfect, she often told them. It's about telling your story. If you sing from your heart, people will feel it. Her words resonated deeply with her pupils, many of whom struggled with self-doubt or fear of judgment. Under her guidance, they began to shed those insecurities, discovering confidence they didn't know they had. For example, there was Mia, a shy 12-year-old who rarely spoke up in school. At first, she hesitated to join Eleanor's class, convinced she wasn't good enough. But after just a few sessions, she surprised everyone, including herself, by volunteering to sing a solo at the next community talent show. When she stepped onto the stage, her hands trembled, and her voice wavered slightly at the start. But as she continued, something remarkable happened. Her nerves melted away, replaced by a sense of freedom and pride. By the time she finished, the audience erupted into applause, cheering not just for her performance but for the bravery it took to step into the spotlight. Stories like Mia's became common in the weeks that followed. Parents marveled at how much their children had grown, not just musically but emotionally. They noticed their kids standing taller, speaking more confidently, and taking risks they might have avoided before. It wasn't just about learning to sing. It was about learning to believe in themselves. And while Eleanor never sought recognition for her impact, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment knowing she had played a part in helping these young lives blossom. But Eleanor's influence extended far beyond the classroom. As word of her past achievements spread, the town rallied around her, determined to honor her legacy in meaningful ways. The local newspaper published a feature article about her journey, complete with photographs of her performing at the community center and quotes from neighbors who described her as a treasure we almost missed. The piece caught the attention of regional media outlets, leading to interviews on radio shows and even a segment on the evening news. Suddenly, Eleanor found herself thrust into a level of visibility she hadn't experienced in decades. At first, the attention made her uneasy. She wasn't seeking fame or validation. All she wanted was to share her love of music with those around her. But as she saw how her story inspired others, not just in her town, but across the region, she began to embrace it. In interviews, she spoke candidly about her decision to leave the professional music scene, emphasizing that stepping away hadn't been a failure, but rather a choice to prioritize her well-being. Sometimes, she said during one particularly moving interview, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that no longer serves you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is come back to it when the time feels right. Her message resonated with countless listeners, many of whom reached out to thank her for giving them permission to redefine success on their own terms. Some shared stories of leaving high-pressure careers to pursue simpler, happier lives. Others expressed gratitude for the reminder that it's never too late to revisit old passions. Eleanor's story became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt stuck or unsure of their path forward. Back in the town, the community found creative ways to celebrate Eleanor's contributions. The annual summer festival, which typically featured food stalls and craft booths, added a new element that year, a tribute concert dedicated entirely to her. Local musicians performed covers of songs she loved, while former students sang pieces they had learned under her tutelage. The highlight of the evening came when Eleanor herself took the stage, accompanied by a group of children holding hands as they sang a heartfelt rendition of one of her favorite ballads. The sight brought tears to the eyes of everyone in attendance, including Eleanor herself. Yet despite the accolades and celebrations, Eleanor remained grounded, refusing to let the attention change who she was at her core. She continued tending to her garden, chatting with neighbors and attending community events without fanfare. To her, the true reward wasn't the applause or the recognition. It was the connections she had forged and the lives she had touched along the way. Every note she taught, every smile she exchanged, every moment of encouragement she offered felt like a gift she was grateful to give. As autumn arrived, painting the hills surrounding the town in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor reflected on how much had changed since that fateful Friday night. She had walked into the community center expecting nothing more than another quiet evening in the background. Instead, she had stepped into a new chapter of her life, one filled with purpose, joy, and the knowledge that her voice mattered in ways she had never imagined. While she didn't know what the future held, she felt certain of one thing. She was exactly where she was meant to be. As the seasons changed and winter settled over the town, wrapping everything in a soft blanket of snow, Eleanor's life continued to unfold in ways that felt both extraordinary and deeply fulfilling. The whirlwind of attention she had experienced in the months following her performance at the community center had begun to settle, leaving behind a quiet but profound sense of purpose. While the initial excitement had died down, the impact of her decision to sing that night lingered, not just in her own heart but in the hearts of those around her. One chilly December morning, as Eleanor bundled up in her woolen scarf and gloves to fetch the newspaper from her porch, she noticed something unusual. A small group of children was gathered near the edge of her driveway, their breath forming tiny clouds in the frosty air. They were huddled together, whispering excitedly and glancing toward her house. When they saw her step outside, one of them, a boy named Liam, approached shyly, holding out a handmade card decorated with glitter and drawings of musical notes. "For you, Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his cheeks pink from the cold. "We made it in school. Thank you for teaching us how to sing." Eleanor took the card gently, her eyes scanning the colorful artwork and the heartfelt messages scrawled inside. Each child had signed their name, adding little doodles or phrases, like "You're the best," and "Thank you for believing in me." Her throat tightened as she realized what this simple gesture meant, not just to her, but to them. These kids weren't just thanking her for lessons. They were expressing gratitude for the way she had helped them see themselves differently. It wasn't about becoming great singers. It was about learning to trust their voices, both literal and metaphorical. "Thank you," Eleanor replied softly, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the most wonderful gift I could ever receive." The children beamed at her response, their faces lighting up with pride. After waving goodbye, they hurried off to finish building a snowman nearby, leaving Eleanor standing on her porch, clutching the card and feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Moments like these reminded her why she had chosen to embrace this new chapter of her life. Teaching music wasn't just about passing on skills, it was about fostering confidence, creativity, and connection, and seeing the joy it brought to others made every moment worth it. By spring, Eleanor had become a fixture in the community in ways she never anticipated. She led weekly singing sessions at the senior center, where retirees joined in harmonizing old classics, their laughter mingling with the melodies. She collaborated with local schools to organize mini-concerts, giving students a platform to showcase their talents. Even the annual talent show at the community center evolved under her influence, shifting from light-hearted entertainment to a celebration of courage and self-expression. People who had once hesitated to participate now eagerly signed up, inspired by Eleanor's example. But perhaps the most unexpected development came when a regional arts foundation reached out to honor Eleanor for her contributions to the community. At first, she was hesitant to accept the award, insisting she didn't deserve such recognition. "I'm just doing what makes me happy," she told the organizers over the phone. But they persisted, explaining that her story had resonated with so many people, teachers, parents, artists, and dreamers alike, that honoring her felt like a way to celebrate the power of art to transform lives. The ceremony took place on a warm April evening, held outdoors beneath a canopy of twinkling string lights. Friends, neighbors, former students, and even strangers traveled from neighboring towns to attend. As Eleanor stepped onto the stage to accept the award, a beautifully crafted plaque engraved with words of gratitude, she was met with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked out at the sea of smiling faces, each one representing a life touched by her journey. In her acceptance speech, Eleanor spoke candidly about the importance of embracing vulnerability and rediscovering passions long buried. "Life has a funny way of nudging us out of our comfort zones," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Sometimes it takes a playful dare, or even a gentle push, from someone else to remind us of the gifts we carry within ourselves. I'm grateful for that night at the community center, not because it brought me applause, but because it reminded me of the joy of sharing my voice and of listening to yours." Her words struck a chord with everyone present, prompting murmurs of agreement and nods of understanding. By the end of the evening, countless attendees approached her to share their own stories of rediscovery, inspired by her example to pursue long-forgotten dreams or try something new. For Eleanor, hearing these accounts reinforced her belief that every act of courage, no matter how small, has the potential to inspire others. As summer rolled around again, bringing with it longer days and warmer nights, Eleanor found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that fateful Friday evening. She still cherished her quiet moments, the early mornings spent tending to her garden, the afternoons reading by the window, but she also relished the connections she had formed and the opportunities to make a difference in her community. Whether it was mentoring young singers, performing at local events, or simply chatting with neighbors over cups of tea, she felt a deep sense of belonging and fulfillment. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Eleanor allowed herself a rare moment of introspection. She thought about the young woman she had once been, the ambitious singer chasing stardom in New York City, and compared her to the person she had become, a mentor, a friend, and a source of inspiration for her town. Both versions of herself were equally valid, she realized, each shaped by the experiences and choices that had defined their respective chapters. What amazed her most was how seamlessly the two halves of her life seemed to merge now. Her past hadn't disappeared. Instead, it had enriched her present, allowing her to guide others with wisdom born of both triumph and struggle. In sharing her story, she had given others permission to embrace their own complexities, to acknowledge their fears, honor their strengths, and take risks without worrying about perfection. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a contented smile playing on her lips. She didn't know what the future held, but she was certain of one thing. She would continue to sing, not just with her voice, but with her actions, her kindness, and her unwavering belief in the beauty of human connection. Life, she had learned, was a melody composed of countless notes, some bright and joyful, others soft and tender, and sometimes all it took was a single note, one brave, unexpected moment, to turn an ordinary tune into something extraordinary.